Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Encourage Mindset. I'm your host, Ethan Vandehei. Today with me is Chandler Lyles, and he's going to be diving into an exceptional topic, and that topic is turning criticism into a leadership advantage. Welcome, Chandler, to the show, and why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your story?
Sure, Ethan. First off, thanks for having me on, man. I know you and I had to move this around a couple times, so I appreciate you being flexible with me and helping us make this happen. This is great. I'm excited to talk about this topic because I tell people all the time, leadership should suck if you're doing it right. And a part of being a good leader is learning how to take criticism from people around you and the people that you're trying to lead and help. And it's we can get into this a little later, but it's interesting when you're trying to lead somebody and care for them and take them somewhere they're trying to go and that's helpful for the organization and all those things, and then they're going to take the time to criticize you, it can hurt if you're your self-esteem as a leader is lower than it should be. And so I'm very excited to talk about today's topic. But my background, I started my career in the Air Force. I tried to go to college and it didn't work out. Made it about 3 semesters, just long enough to meet my wife, which was very fortunate timing. And dropped out, joined the military. Got very fortunate with my job. I was a contract specialist for the Air Force. So basically what that job does is it helps civilian organizations, civilian companies do business with the government. So the government contracts out a lot of things. If you've ever seen the movie War Dogs with Jonah Hill and yeah, I was the military side of that. I just wasn't buying cool things like, cases and cases of ammo and all the things. So, but I did get to spend like $50 million by the time I was 23 and left. I worked on, a ton of different contract actions on a bunch of different things. I worked with a ton of great leaders, learned a lot from other people, even got a few opportunities to lead while I was in myself, and then decided to leave and pursue my first business. I had fallen in love with being an entrepreneur while I was in the military. I was selling barbecue to people out of my backyard for fun. And I was like, well, what would happen if we made this a full-time thing? And so moved back to Lexington, Kentucky with my mom and dad and my wife at the time. And we all started something called Lyles Barbecue Company. We were very good at branding. So it was our last name plus what we did. And we wanted to make money. So we called it a company. Yeah. So I got better at branding as we went along. But I did that for 6 years, built that company up, did a lot of really cool things, crossed $1 million on our P&L, which was really cool because it was a fairly small bootstrapped business. We were about a 1,800 square foot restaurant, 30 seats or so. And so we were doing pretty well for that size, and we were bootstrapped. We didn't have any outside investment or anything like that. The barbecue business got up to about 25 staff members, 20 to 25, depending on the season and how many part-time workers we had going, 4 or 5 full-time people. And then, and we can get into this too, if you'd like to, but basically ended up having a crisis of ego, I would probably call it. I thought I was somebody that couldn't fail. I thought I could take any risk in business I wanted, and it would always work out because it had always worked out to that point. And so I just had no humility and no respect for the game that is building a business. And I tried to open up a brand new restaurant concept instead of opening another barbecue restaurant, which would have been the smarter move. I went for this huge bet, leveraged all of the business, leveraged everything, time, money. It was bad. And basically 6 months later, the entire company was gone. And that team, we ended up going from like 25 team members as a company to like 75 team members in 30 days. It was a nightmare. I learned a lot from that 30-day process plus the 6 months after that. But essentially the business went out of business, and then I had to get a job. And so I ended up down in Nashville working for a guy named Dave Ramsey. He's got a radio show, and he's got a team of about 1,000, and he's got a brand there where he coaches other business owners. And so I got really lucky to end up there because I got to learn from a lot of really smart marketers inside that building. I got to learn from the clients of that business. It was called Entree Leadership. And I got to learn from all the clients of that business, which were a bunch of small business owners. And I got to ask them a lot of questions. And also a big part of that curriculum at that organization is leadership based. And so I got to learn a lot about leadership while I was there. And about 2 years into my run there at Ramsey, I got bitten with the bug again to go start my own business. And so I had made a couple friends while I was there at Ramsey, and we got together and said, what would it look like for us to own a business? And we did a couple things and basically started High Beam Marketing, which is my company now, as a side hustle. None of us quit our day jobs. None of us just launched into it to chase our dream. We all got remote jobs to be able to have flexibility within our schedules and to be able to build our book of business for the agency on the side. And we treated it like a side hustle for about 1.5 years. And the company was doing about we were on pace to do 380,000 before we quit our jobs and went full time. And that was about a year and a half ago. And so this year we'll do right over $600,000 as long as nothing crazy happens up or down, which in entrepreneurship can happen. But that company has essentially doubled in size every single year. We just hired our first full-time employee. So now our team is a team of 4, and we're probably getting ready to hire a 5th and 6th person by the time this year ends. And so, yeah, that's my career to this point. I know it's a little bit of a long story, and it made no sense if you try to connect those dots looking forward. But, like Steve Jobs said, you can only make sense when you're looking backwards, connecting the dots. So.
Hey, I love stories, and I love getting to learn, your story as well. And when you kind of dove in about that with Dave Ramsey, I mean, I listen to his podcast. I'm sure many people have listened to his stuff. He's awesome and definitely an expert in leadership. So can you talk a little bit about that and how it relates to the topic here? What did you learn there that relates to, taking this criticism and turning it into a leadership advantage? I'm sure he had some huge pointers that you eventually got to pick up.
Yeah. When you lead a team that is 1,000 people, which is what they had there, at least when I was there, I'm not sure what size the company is now. Plus you have a nationally known brand. There's plenty of companies that have at least 1,000 employees and larger, to be honest, but they don't have the same sort of national recognition or national criticism from both public and internal sources. When somebody has a public brand like that, this weird thing happens in our heads where we think that person's sort of your best friend because you're listening to them talk for a couple hours every single day inside of your ears. And so when you see them in person, you're like, oh, I know you really well. And it might be the first time that person on the other side of the microphone has ever actually met you, right? So it's a lot of complexity there. And, there's plenty of things that happened while I was there. But the biggest thing I took away from it was they tried to over communicate everything that was happening all the time within appropriate levels, I would say. They would make sure that things were happening as best they could. I mean, it's 1,000 people, so you can't be perfect, but they would try to inform the right people of things that are happening at the right time and then sort of disseminate that information out from there, all the way to having like giant town hall style meetings. I was there when COVID happened, and, there was originally it was I think it was like an email blast that went out that said like, hey, this stuff's happening. We're keeping an eye on it. Here's what we're doing. We'll let you know what's going to happen, yada, yada. And then maybe a day later, it was so long ago now, I can't really remember, but basically a day later, he had everybody into the leadership team there at Ramsey, and him had everybody into the main area there and communicated out like, hey, here's what's happening. The state of Tennessee is asking us to quarantine and do these things, So we're going to go ahead and give you 30 minutes. Everybody pack everything up, get going, But it was always proactive communication with whatever was happening. And I'm sure if you asked any leader in any position, and especially at that company, they would tell you yeah, I'd probably like to do some things differently with a myriad of situations, but that's leadership, right? You do the best you can with what you got and what you know and what your experience is in that moment. And my rule of thumb is just try to have the best intention possible, because if you operate with the best intention possible, and then you're willing to say, I'm sorry when you screw up, and you'll get the trust of your people a lot more easily and maintain that trust if you're willing to do those two things.
Yeah, no, I love that answer. And it kind of relates to this, right? Because you want to keep building that trust that you talked about. So how do you address criticism within your team? And you might have so many examples because you worked with a big team, you've been in a 9-to-5, and then also right now you're an entrepreneur too with a team. So how do you address criticism within your team without demotivating your members?
Like me criticizing them or them criticizing me?
Kind of both, right? Because you don't want to hear them harsh and damaging you. Also, you don't want to do the same thing.
So I'll start with criticizing, quote unquote, criticizing your team members, right? If you're leading somebody, there's going to be times when you have to give constructive criticism to them, because if you're actually getting to the place where you're criticizing and being hyper aggressive or something like that, either you're a really bad leader running a bad organization, or that person is a really bad fit and you've lost your cool and you've made a bad decision months ago because you should have done something way before it got to this point. There's really no excuse for you to ever get to that point where you've lost your cool with somebody you're leading, because again, in the spirit of proactive communication, you should be talking to them way, way before that. And so my favorite way to do it is with one-on-one meetings with people one-on-one. And that's where relationships are built, one-on-one. And in one-on-one meetings, I don't know if you have one-on-one meetings with your leadership now or anybody you lead, Ethan, but like a lot of people do them wrong, where the leader will do one of two things. One, they'll cancel, reschedule, move the one-on-one meeting. And so it's seen as not a high priority item by the person being led, right? Oh, boss is just going to move the meeting again, whatever. I don't have to really prepare for it. I don't have to really think about it. Or two, and this may be an and/or situation, by the time you actually get to the meeting, the boss just sits there and talks for 30 minutes straight and doesn't actually ask the other person any questions, doesn't actually build any sort of rapport. They spend it just basically being able to take the whole time to get their ramblings out of their mind and onto that person's plate, and now they got to go deal with it. Versus like how I like to do a one-on-one meeting, I try to do an 80 to 90 to 10% rule. And what I mean by that is 80 to 90% of the time I want to talk about them and have them talking, and 10% of the time at the very end I want to say the few things I need to say. And so I start the meeting with like, hey, what's going on in your personal life? What's happening? What did you do this weekend? What have you been up to? I've got to connect with that person on a personal level. What are your goals? Like, I should already know that, but if I don't, like, what are you trying to accomplish this year? What are you working on? What are you doing outside of here? Oh, you're working on back in the restaurant days. Oh, you're going to college. Cool. What do you want to be? What do you want to do? You know, because when I know something about you personally, I can then start to connect those things to your work life, right? Because I know, we both know this, you can't expect people to work for you for 30 years. And so while they're there with you, you have to find a way to connect that stage of their journey to that time with you if you want to get the most out of them. They may need help to see what being with you in that moment is going to do for them. And so when you have that personal connection with them, you can actually start to weave those narratives in and out of the conversation, both in that one-on-one meeting and then just random times around the office or random times on Zoom or just whenever you're talking to them, you at least have that card in your back pocket to know what to connect to. Yeah. The next thing I want to do is, hey, how's work going? You know, maybe the first 10 minutes is personal life stuff. Next 10-ish minutes is, hey, what's going on with work? How's your bandwidth? What are the blockers? What's happening? What's going right? What's going poorly? And like really ask a lot of how, what questions, and then shut up and let the person answer. That is so hard for people to do. It's really hard for people to sit in silence for 3 seconds when they're in a conversation. It's very difficult for new leaders and bad leaders that have been doing it leading for a long time, right? Ask a how question, ask a what question, occasionally ask a why question. I don't love why questions because they can, with tone and inflection, come off as, you know, combative, and that's bad for building the relationship. But how and what is just curiosity. I'm just curious about what's going on. Cool, let me take notes, right? Like, and I don't have a phone, I don't have a laptop. Don't be a note taker on a laptop or an iPad. Like, pen and paper, because everything else, I'm assuming you're tweeting or texting or something else, because that's what I would be doing if I was looking at my phone. I don't believe you're listening to me. So get a pen out, get a paper out. And if you can get away with no notes, like do no notes, but you cannot be distracted. That person has to think everything in that 30 minutes is all about them, and you're trying to focus in on them. And then make notes, offer some thoughts, maybe keep them very short, maybe 1 or 2 sentences. Oh, cool. I'll follow up and see what we can do about that blocker. I didn't know about that. Let me ask John about that later. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. And then finally, at the end, you can get to the criticism, right? And you can't, if you're working with somebody and you're just criticizing them all the time, you're a bad leader. Because you've started out as a bad leader, because if you're hiring somebody you have to criticize all the time, you hired the wrong person. So that means you suck at interviewing and you suck at hiring. So it's always your fault as the leader, right? If you have done a good job of building a relationship with that person and building trust over a period of time, and now it's time to criticize, and criticize is such a brutal word. It's really just like, hey, I need you to be better in this area. You know, tell them that. But you should, if it's a good person and it's a good fit and it's a good employee, like 80% of your conversation with them should be like, hey, here's a story of something I saw you do that did really, really well. For instance, at Highbeam, we just hired a brand new person. She's really new, which is really difficult for her to be new because we've been on the team together, the 3 previous employees. We were on the team for 2.5 years before she joined. So we've been through some stuff. We've been through some goods and some bads and some war stories and some laughs. And she's outside of all of that. And so she's not built into the team yet. So when I'm talking to her, I'm trying to take notes and remember, like, even if I'm in a meeting and I'm not talking and she's talking, like, I'm trying to catch her doing things that we want replicated across the entire company. And so for like her, and we have a weekly leadership or a weekly team meeting on Mondays around lunchtime. And she asked a really good question about why we do something the way we do it, which is probably really hard for any new employee to do in any kind of environment, but especially a new company that you're just going into. Because when you ask why, it's like, hey, defend why we're doing this and explain it to me, and not in a accusatorial way or a smart butt way or anything like that, but she genuinely wanted to know. And so she did a really good job of asking why, asking a couple how, what question follow-ups. Have you thought about it like this or something like that? And we had a really good dialogue, and it ended. Well, in our one-on-one, I have a monthly one-on-one with her because she's not my direct report. I told her that. I was like, hey, you crushed that question. Like, that's the kind of stuff we need around here. And like, as we hire more people, I need you to make sure they're doing that. So I'm not criticizing her. I'm giving her a compliment. But now I've built up some emotional bank account with her where if I had to correct her on something, I feel comfortable doing that because I've already built this relationship up. I've already added to it. So if you think about that other person as having a emotional bank account, you never want to overdraw. You always want to have a positive balance. And the bigger the balance is, the more likely it is that they stay there for a really long time. And it's pretty expensive to replace an employee. It's anywhere from 30 to 35% of an employee's salary to have to hire somebody else to replace them. So it's really a lot cheaper for you to do this small legwork on the front end, do these small actions that build retention on the front end, than to try to have to just replace somebody for 30% of their salary over the next 6 months. It just doesn't make sense to me the other way. Any questions about how you talk to people and give criticism, or you feel good about that?
Yeah, I feel really good about that. I think that's a good way to, chime into this question. And it's kind of a little bit more on that feedback route, because a lot of people think criticism as negative feedback, right? I think everybody does, or at least that's how it begins. So how do you turn this negative feedback into an opportunity for personal and professional growth?
Did you play any sports growing up or anything?
I played so many sports growing up.
Yeah.
I mean, so I know.
Yeah. So if you've ever played a sport, or even if you were like in an actor, like in a play, and you had a director there, right? You have somebody that's in charge of making sure that the thing goes well. If you've been in that and that was a good person, what every good coach or director or leader has in common goes back to what we just said. It's really not that complicated. They've built the relationship with that person on the front end. The only people that get in trouble on the back end is when they've not built that relational bank account up. It's really that simple. And if you've not connected with somebody, you don't know their name, you don't know their husband or boyfriend or wife or girlfriend's name, like you don't know their dog's name, you don't know their dog's sick, like, oh, hey, I saw your performance dipped this week. What's going on? Is everything okay at home? Like, how's Sally the beagle? Like, is everything okay there? Like, you cannot give anybody any sort of criticism, any kind of constructive feedback. You can't be a hard ass on the field if you've not first cared and laughed with people and connected with them. You just can't. Otherwise, it's just going to be like a combative thing. It's us versus them. And if it's us versus them and you're on the same team, you will lose.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think, I don't know, just in my personal experience, I think my boss, Chris McGillis, does a great job at that. Like, today was Monday, right? This past weekend, I went to Door County in Wisconsin up for the weekend, and he asked me all about it today. And it was awesome, because as an employee, you get excited to share that stuff with people. Like,
yeah.
And that's what you want at your work environment, and your culture too, is a place for people to rave about what they do over the weekends or what they're excited about. And I think that allows leaders to get a good connection with them too, that you talked about there, Chandler.
That's right. Yep. So on the other side of the coin, what do you do when your team criticizes you? It's pretty simple. You shut the bleep up and you say, thank you for that feedback. I will reflect on it and I'll get back to you. Or if you're confused, you may ask several how, what questions, never why. And please explain, like, what's going on? Like, what do you think? Like, okay, how did you get there? What are you thinking? Okay, cool. And at the end of it, you don't justify what you did. You don't justify why you're right and they're wrong. You don't say, hey, this is how we do it, deal with it. You say, okay, cool. Well, let me Like if I don't have an actual answer for you here, like here's how I'm going to improve this in the future, or like here's how we're going to work on this, right? Maybe you need to get away to cool down because it's hard to get feedback from people you're trying to pour your heart and soul in, and you're running the pressures of your business, which is brutal. Then take the time and like, all right, cool. Like, do you mind if I think about it overnight, kind of digest everything you said, and then like we can connect tomorrow for like 15, 20 minutes and try to find a resolution that will work for both of us. Because if you are not that type of leader, people may offer you genuine feedback one time. And if you blow it up in their face, guess what's going to happen? Everybody shuts up. Nobody's going to tell you anything anymore. You're going to have a bunch of yes men and yes women running around you. Nobody's going to tell you when things are on fire. Nobody's going to tell you when you're doing a bad job, and you're going to atrophy as a leader. And you're not even a leader. You're just a bad boss at that point. And then you're going to, like 6 months later, it may take some time because you probably hired good people. I genuinely think that there's only, I think maybe Jocko Willink said this. It's like there's no such thing as bad teams, only bad leaders. And I kind of believe that after running the restaurant business for so long, because plenty of people will tell you restaurant people suck. And I will tell you that restaurant leadership sucks more often than not. And so you need to build a culture where your team feels comfortable giving you feedback. You know, when I was younger and first starting the barbecue restaurant out, you know, I was 24, 25, like I was all in, pedal to the metal, like we're going to the moon, like I'm in, And I was aggressive too. Like I was very aggressive with my communication style. And there were several times I can recall where people would like tell me something and I'd be like, you're wrong. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Please don't ever come to me with that dumb nonsense again. Those aren't the exact words I said, but I guarantee that's the feeling they had in their head. And what ended up happening is those people stopped bringing me ideas. And that's stupid because they're the ones making the dish. They're the one working the register. They're the one cleaning the dish pit. And if I told them to do something in the dish pit, for instance, and I'm like, hey, you got to do it this way. And then one time they come to me with an offer or a way to make it better and run it better. And I'm like, don't do that. Just do it the way I told you to do it. Like, don't mess around. Don't mess it up. Like they're going to check out. They're not going to have any ownership over their job. They're not going to care about you as their leader because you don't listen to them. Communication's a two-way street. And any criticism I have for them might as well just be, you know, white noise in the background, because if they can't offer that same sort of communication with me, then they're definitely not going to take it from me.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that's something that you see, like you said, in your personal experiences in a relationship. You also see it in professional setting. I mean, I was in a restaurant experience as well for a server in a family-owned business for about 6-7 years. And then I went to the corporate world at Red Lobster for 2 years. And I can totally agree with you, Chandler. The management style from a family-owned place to a chain it's totally crazy how different it is. And you can tell, like, when you work with certain people, they're more effective in their communication. And when you go to some other places, they kind of lose it because I think they think their core values or their whole restaurant vibe picks up those communications, which just certainly wasn't true. And obviously it's leading to Red Lobster being bankrupt and all this other stuff. So it makes a lot of sense. But
I'll blame a little bit of private equity for that, but yeah.
Yeah, there was some other problems. But for a personal question for you, how has your approach to criticism evolved over the course of your leadership journey?
That's a great question. I think that I became a lot more secure in who I am as a human, and a lot more confident in the fact that it's okay that I don't have all the answers, and I can tell people around me that I don't have all the answers, and that they're not going to have a problem with that. Because the minute I started doing that, I was able to take jokes a lot easier. I was able to take criticism a lot easier. I was able to take negative customer feedback a lot easier. When you just accept the fact that you're not perfect, and it's okay that you're not perfect, it'll never be perfect. You're going to make mistakes. You know, it's better that you accept that early, because then you can just move on and fix the issue, and you make it about the issue instead of about personal feelings. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we say, oh, this person, this leader, this employee is dumb or whatever. And they're really not. It's just the issues we're dealing with are dumb or whatever. And because we've not built up enough trust yet, and we don't know how to communicate with each other, we fight with each other instead of focusing all that energy and attention and time on the issue at hand.
I love that. Is there anything else you think in today's, podcast episode that we need to, spread more awareness of, or maybe there's something you've heard about leadership that you want to share to kind of cover the rest of the podcast?
Yeah, I'll leave you with this story. When I was in the Air Force, well, let me say this first. A lot of people think that to have change and to build relationships and to be a good leader, it takes these big, huge moments, right? Like these big, huge things and these big, huge stories. Those are the things that make people trust us and love us. And those are the great leaders. And yeah, those stories do happen and they are interesting and they're definitely easy to share because they're novel. They don't happen all the time, but that's not where leadership is built. And I've got a great example of how leadership is built on a daily basis in small ways. When I was in the Air Force, my first commander was Lieutenant Colonel Daniels. We had a office of about 50 or 60 people. About half, a little over half maybe, was military. The other half was civilian. And every single morning, if he was in the office Monday through Friday, he would walk the entire office and talk to every single person there. He'd start around 7:30 when he got in and people started getting in, and he'd be done around 8 o'clock by the time everybody else got in. And he would just stop by, give everybody a firm handshake, and he'd go, "Airman Lyles, how are we doing this morning?" "Oh, I'm good, sir. I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. I'm good." And that happened for months and months, and everybody. And over time, I came to realize, and me too, like we all loved this guy. Anything he asked us to do, we would do. But that's a small thing, right? That's a small thing every single day. Took him about a half an hour. You could have a cup of coffee, walk the floor, check in with people. And if you don't have that large of a team, you definitely don't have an excuse for doing it, especially if you're all in the same building. Like, build a system, do something you got to do to like make that happen, because it's a small thing and it's a small check-in. And again, he created an environment where if he had to come in and tell me like, "Hey, Airman Lyles, your hair's a little bit out of regs. Like, would you mind getting that cleaned up after work today?" I'd be like, "Yes, sir. Sorry, I should have taken care of that before you saw it." Like, no big deal. But if he was an ass the whole time, I'd be like, "Whatever, bro. I'm just gonna, like, it's fine. You're making a big deal out of nothing." But because I cared about that guy, because he cared about me first, I was like, I can't believe I just am, like, I'm going to embarrass this guy like this, right? And then he did have an opportunity to do a big leadership thing when I lived on a dorm on base at the time, and we were having issues with our air conditioner making crazy rattling noises. Like, you couldn't sleep through this thing rattling all night. And I just happened to, I was like, "Yeah, I'm just a little tired this morning, sir. AC unit was rattling again, and they still haven't gotten it fixed, but we're trying to get it worked out." And he goes, "Oh, sorry to hear that, man. Let me know if you need anything." I was like, "No, we're good. I'm working on it." Da da da. And then I don't know, maybe 2-3 hours later, the head enlisted guy in the office, senior master sergeant, came over. It's called a first sergeant in the Air Force. He comes over to me. He goes, "Hey, Airman Lyles, just want you to let you know, we talked to the dorm people over there, and they've got your AC unit fixed. It's good to go." Da 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 da. And it was like Colonel Daniels told him, he got it done. It's all fixed. It's all good to go. And so that's a big thing, and that's a better story than like walking around shaking hands and all the things. But it's like, had he just done the one thing, I'd been like, "Yeah, that's okay." Like, that would have been good. But like the fact that he did it all, the big stuff and the little stuff, more importantly, the little stuff, it's like, I still love that guy. And that's been 15 years. And I love to tell that story as often as I can of an example of like really good leadership. And the other story I'll leave you with is also from the Air Force about, if you're going to be the leader, and this goes back to being able to take criticism before you can actually give it, right? You as the leader set the bar. And so we had this other lieutenant in the office there. Lieutenant Butler was his name at the time. He was a squared away guy. Like, in the military, when you have that term, it means you have like the physical standards are on point. Your hair is always on point. Your uniform's on point. All your work is on point. Like, this guy had fanatical levels of expectations. Like, it was like his standards were high. And it was kind of annoying to like us as like young 20-something enlisted dudes. We were like, "Man, this guy is just on it," because we didn't know the big picture. We don't know what we don't know yet. And it was just kind of annoying. But I tell you what, he came to me a couple times and did say, like, because like, I have a little bit of a beard now. It's not too good, but like back then, like when you're in the military, you got to shave every day, and it's just annoying. And like when I was in my early 20s, I didn't really have to shave that much. I don't have a ton of facial hair. And so there'd be some days where I could push it maybe 1-2 days. And especially if I had leave coming up, it was kind of fun to have a beard on leave. So I'd be like, maybe I can push it like 3 days and not shave, and then have a really nice beard when I get done and get back. It's a weird thing to want to do when you can't do it. That's all you want to do. It's very dumb, but it was the way it was. And there was a day where he came up to me and he was like, he took me aside. This is another important thing that we didn't touch on. Criticism should be done in private when possible, and praise should be given in public. 100% of the time, because if you tear somebody down in front of a bunch of other people, it better be for a really, really good reason, or like an offense that that person's not coming back from. Because if you tear them down in front of a bunch of people, like, you've lost them. They're done. You've humiliated them. Like, you've broken trust. Like, you're never getting that person back. You might as well start looking for their replacement. It's over. Or you're going to have to really apologize in front of the whole office, which you should probably do anyways, because everybody else is going to think you're going to dress them down in front of everybody in the office. But he took me to the side, made sure nobody could hear it. He's like, "Hey, Airman Lyles, would you mind at lunch today just running home and like cleaning up your face a little bit? There's a little bit of like it's a little bit hairier than it probably should be, a little 5 o'clock shadow or something. Maybe you missed some, I don't know." Like, he wasn't accusatory. He didn't say like, "Hey, you know, you look like a dirtbag, da da da," whatever, which he probably could have done. And, you know, I definitely have heard military stories of that happening. I've heard it. But he didn't. He did the right thing. And like, again, that guy had his own standard was so high that he could have told me to do anything. And I was like, that dude walks the talk. Like, if you're asking people, you're a hypocrite, you're asking people to do things that you're not already doing yourself at the highest level you want to achieve. Like, don't ask anybody to come up, because they're like, your team is only going to ever fall to the bar you're at. Like, they're not going to go, like, the chances they go above that bar are very low. And so your standards better be at 100 if you want everybody to be at least an 80.
Yeah, totally agree. I love both those stories. They relate a lot to probably everybody in some way, shape, or form. So thank you so much for coming on today, Chandler, and sharing your knowledge about this topic. I know I've learned a lot. And one day when I become a leader and manage some people, this will all be really helpful to look back and watch. So I really appreciate it.
Sure, man. Thanks for having me on.